Plants, the green frontier. These are the discussions of the podcast Horticult. Its continuing mission to talk about strange new cultivars, to seek out new flowers and plant them, to boldly garden like no one has before. Hey, what's up? Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. For you first-time listeners, thank you for finding the Horticult. We love you. This is a podcast where plant geeks can get their freak on. We let loose on all aspects of horticulture, but we focus on water-wise conservation efforts. We are based in Utah, which is the second driest state. We have the second highest water use per capita. So it's a very big deal for our people in our state to conserve as much water as possible. We have a beautiful landscape here in Utah with mountains, valleys, but we have to work on changing our cultural practices to saving water. All right, on this episode of the podcast, me and Brad sit down with Jason Berto. He's a certified arborist who has a nonprofit organization called Releaf Utah. His main goal and focus in this nonprofit is to educate people on how to plant trees properly and how to make trees live to their full potential in their lifespan. So we're talking, he wants an average 100 years per tree. And right now, the average of a landscape tree is around 7. So let's get it on with Jason Berto. I'm B. Flane.
And I am B. Rad.
And we are the Horticult. Thanks for coming along for the ride. On today's episode of the podcast, we have a special guest, Jason Berto. He is arborist. I'd heard your name come up in the community a little bit here and there. We interviewed Mila Hokie.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And she said she had a run-in with you.
Yeah, she got to stop by our gravel bed nursery, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But cool. It's one of the cool things that Releaf Utah is doing on there. So I'm an ISA certified arborist. I'm also a certified municipal specialist, and I hold a tree risk assessment qualification. I'm also a graduate of the American Society of Consulting Arborists Consulting Academy, a graduate of the Municipal Forestry Institute, and I am the 2015 Utah Community Forestry Council Arborist of the Year.
Oh, geez.
Excellent. Wow. Yeah, nice.
It's a pretty impressive resume.
It's a passion that I fell into. It started in 2007 in Camas, Utah. I was a member of the Camas Valley Lions Club, and we were looking for some funds to replace the money we had lost for a scholarship. And I stumbled across a tree planting grant with Tree Utah when they had an arborist on staff. And we did several projects together, and our first project went off really well. But as I was doing my research with the local landscapers and the nurseries as to what trees to plant, I was getting a lot of different information. None of it was consistent. And so I started expanded the realm of my research, if you will, to looking at nationwide studies and what the International Society of Arboriculture recommends. And as it turns out, most of what was being shared with me as information was very outdated. And there were a lot of improvements that we've learned both via research and through practice and by observing the life of trees instead of over 1 year, 2 years, but looking at them over 30 and 50 and 100 years. And we've learned a lot. And I wanted to take that information and start to share it and to do a better job of getting our trees to realize their full potential. A lot of people talk about tree survival rates. Tree guarantees. The tree's guaranteed for 1 year. We're really stoked that it lived for 3 years. I think instead of focusing on survival, we need to be focusing on thrivability, on maximizing the potential of a tree. Because just because a tree's hanging out, has some green leaves on it, doesn't mean it's growing, doesn't mean it's cleaning our air, doesn't mean it's cleaning our water, doesn't mean it's improving students' grades. There are so many attributes associated, positive attributes associated with trees. If we don't give them the best chance to grow, we don't get to realize those benefits. And there's a rough number in the urban forestry community that a tree needs to live somewhere between 7 to 20 years before we break even with the carbon and the carbon footprint cost of growing the tree and moving the tree and mulching it and putting in the irrigation and doing all the tree care for it. So if we're not planting a tree to last for 20 years, part of me says, why bother? And our goal at Releaf Utah is to incorporate research that we've seen and apply it to our local planting conditions to try to enable trees to live for 4 generations. 100 years is our goal when we plant a tree.
So before you came into Camas, tell us a little bit about yourself before that. Just curious. What led to this?
It's a really long story. And there are associated little tree stories with it. So starting out when I was 3 years old, I decided to take the family station wagon for a drive with my 1-year-old sister and my 2-year-old brother. Fortunately, I hit an oak tree instead of crashing the car into a pond, which probably would have not allowed me to be here to enjoy this podcast.
There's
today.
no airbags in your wagon, so
not
you guys
1970.
are lucky. Yeah, right.
So good old oak tree saved me.
Oh wow.
I grew up in Pennsylvania and spent a lot of times in the woods in the mountains of Pennsylvania, Penn's Woods. Whereas a lot of my friends would go to the Jersey Shore, the beach. I was a tree and a mountain guy. So I had this childhood exposure to trees. And then in college, I sat on a committee called the Campus Planning and Physical Resources Committee. I'm a graduate of Colgate University in Hamilton, New York. And some national publications have classified Colgate as one of the top beautiful campuses in the United States, if not the world. We were charged, the committee that I was on was dealing with trees along what was called Willow Path. And willow trees aren't necessarily the most hardy tree. They really like to live more in a moist, wet environment. They can be susceptible to some different funguses and diseases. And so we were looking at maybe changing these willows to beech trees. Colgate University just celebrated its bicentennial, founded in 1819. And here we are as a group, and we're about to put in different trees. And Willow Path will no longer be Willow Path because they're beech trees. Oh. And that exposure there really kind of connected me with people's personal relationships with trees. Because, again, a beech tree probably side by side to a willow would be a superior tree if we were doing kind of the tree versus tree fight on there. But because of the long-term history of the willow trees, we wanted to retain the willows, and we actually found a species of willow that was resistant to the disease at the time. And unfortunately, I don't remember the disease, but it was a Salix vitulina bretensis was the willow that we found, and willow path still exists today.
So
at
is
Colgate
this
University.
a tree species that you found, or that
I was part of the group that helped find it. I wasn't.
Wow.
I can't claim to be
a
tree geek back then. Yeah. So fast forward, I moved out to Utah. I spent 10 years as a seasonal worker. I was a ski patroller, a river guide, mountain bike instructor. Did a lot of fun outdoor stuff, and then spent 5 years with the Salt Lake City Fire Department as a firefighter, EMT, hazmat specialist, and I was also a member of Utah Task Force 1, our urban search and rescue team. And that kind of gave me some exposure to trees. So I actually rescued a cat out of a tree.
Nice.
A snowy day.
As expected for a firefighter.
That kind of seems to be part of our calling on there. So I had a chance to work around trees then, but still wasn't I wasn't an arborphile yet on there. I was a fan of trees. But anyway, the Lions Club project came along. I had left the fire department due to PTSD. And after planting trees for a couple of years with the Lions Club, I really decided it was my calling and my passion. And I realized a lot of the healing benefits that come from working with soil and plants and creating life and taking care of life and the benefits they give back to us. And quite frankly, had I not discovered arboriculture, I probably would be a homeless person living at 210 Rio Grande Street in Salt Lake City on there. So I consider myself really fortunate to have stumbled into this via the Lions Club.
Definitely.
And 3 years after our first planting, we did plantings each year. Our state forester said, why aren't you an arborist? And I looked at her and was like, I don't know. So I looked in it to more, studied for the test. I had enough practical hours from my experience, passed the test, and was going to national conferences and studying and learning more and seeing how we can try to share what I've learned and what other people have learned. It's not me. I'm just the conduit for this gigantic ocean of information about planting trees and what we can do to improve, their survivability and their thrivability, and make sure that we have a sustainable environment here to live in. They provide so many benefits. I mean, it's 102 out today, probably be like 120 if we didn't have the trees that the earlier settlers planted down in this valley for us.
Right.
So it's just kind of keeping the ball rolling, if you will.
Yeah, things the tree provides, I think we take for granted, because we weren't the ones that put it in or made the effort, like you just said. We don't even think about that. You're absolutely right, though. We probably would be 120 degrees right now.
Mm-hmm. And so and I guess this turns back to Releaf Utah's goal is to share that, to share the benefits, and to be a clearinghouse for the information, and to bring people together when we do community plantings to share information on how they can do it a little bit better. A lot of the reasons that we see trees not being successful are really easy to prevent on there, but because of the sort of chain of the tree from the growing nursery to the wholesale nursery to the retail nursery to the landscaper to the end user, a little gets lost in each of those transfers. And at the end of it, we typically see trees that aren't, I'd say the number one issue that I see for trees that are in distress are they were not planted properly. Okay. And out of that,
I was going to ask.
Probably the biggest issue is trees planted too deeply.
I've always thought that too.
I almost sometimes when people call up and start to describe to me their tree issue, I almost want to cut to the chase and ask if they can see the root flare of the tree, or did they see how deeply it was planted? Do they have any idea? And typically no. And I go out and I'd say 1% of the time I see trees planted at the proper depth. I've seen them anywhere from 1 to 10, 11 inches too deep.
And I've got a question on that point. So do you think that quite often trees are planted at the soil level, but then later on as mulch and compost and things are top dressed around those trees, and over time it gets a little deeper and a little bit deeper and then creates that
typically
issue?
No.
Okay.
Would be my short answer. Okay. Yes, there is part of the aftercare practice can allow that to happen, but typically the trees come from the nursery, whether they're container grown or balled and burlapped with too much soil.
Got it.
And if the person planting the tree doesn't either remove the soil or try to identify it, so there's a couple different ways. We typically remove the soil until we can see the root flare or the first lateral flare. Some people will take like a surveyor's probe, and they'll use that, and they'll probe and they'll find the root, and they'll say, oh, it's 3 inches, so we need to plant it 3 inches high. But essentially, we want the flare or the lateral roots to be at the grade or actually even a little high these days. One of the reasons it's so important is, and a lot of people don't realize this, and I didn't know this, is that roots are involved in gas exchange for the trees. And so if they're too deep, or if they're in soil that's clay or impacted, or there's so much soil above them from the nursery, they don't have a chance for accurate gas exchange. And sometimes we'll see the roots go out laterally and then start to move upwards towards the air. Uh-huh. And it'll give us a funky situation. And sometimes the roots will surface, like in the case of aspen trees that are prolific rooters, and they reproduce primarily via suckering or sprouting. They'll send their roots out, and eventually we'll see them pop up into the grass. And a lot of people find that undesirable. I just came from a property where the neighbor had planted crack willows, Salix fragilis, fragile willow, literally in Latin. And the trees are now 55 feet high. There's roots running 20 to 30 feet from the tree across the property line, and they're throwing a lot of garbage out.
Yeah.
You know, the crack is from the crack of the branches breaking when the wind blows through it. And it was funny, when I arrived on the site, it was almost like somebody staged it. There were broken branches in the front yard, and the trees are in the back. And I walk around, there's more, and then there's branches in the back. And at first I was like, this almost looks like they were cut, because it wasn't a typical jagged break, but this is what's typical with the weak wood of the crack willow, is they break off like that. It's just, that's their characteristic.
That might be their way to propagate themselves in a natural environment.
Partially propagation. The second way that it comes out, and almost everything that I'm going to say here, there will be a tree in nature that will disprove what I'm saying.
Yes, so true.
Mother Nature's awesome, so there's very rarely 100%. But in general, the faster growing trees, their strategy is to grow and get some foliage, and let's outcompete people by growing fast. But by growing fast, they're not necessarily laying up, dense cellulose layers and lignin to create that hardwood, and then we don't have a really strong tree. A lot of times we also see structural deficiencies because it takes more energy to grow out horizontally than it does kind of at an acute angle, and that creates a structural weakness. And where those trees are attached at a narrow angle when they're little is not a big deal, but in that little V position, as they grow larger, the bark can actually push them apart and cause what's called included or occluded bark, and it's a structural weak point. And you'll see where a tree will just break off right there. And so roughly based on the attachment angle of a branch to the main stem, we can kind of predict how likely it is for that branch to fall off. So the smaller the angle, the less desirable, the less strong that union is. So we would rather see like a 90-degree, in a perfect arborist world,
yeah, right.
a 90-degree connection to every branch going up one central leader and everything in perfect scenarios. But most of our poplars, our cottonwoods, our willows, they all want to get their leaves out and get growing first. Now, some of our slower growing trees, some of my favorites, like the ginkgo biloba or the bur oak Quercus macrocarpa, or even a bald cypress. Oh, sure. Those trees don't start leafing out until like June-ish, July, and I get calls, and I even get nervous sometimes. I'm like, oh boy, it's been here 15 years, and now it's done. But their strategy is, let's grow a little slower. We're going to have a slower growing period, but we're not going to suffer the swings in temperature, and we're going to lay up solid, harder wood, and we're going to grow with a better structure.
Yeah.
And we're going to provide a tree that doesn't require so much maintenance. It doesn't become invasive, doesn't start showing up where we don't want it to, like the Siberian elm, which is a really challenging tree in Utah, or the Russian olive and the salt cedar, the tamarisk, both are listed as state weeds now on there, but they both were good intended trees. We have them in Summit County where UDOT planted them on the side of the highway embankments to reduce soil erosion. Yeah. Sounded like a great idea 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
On there, but now we found out they're invasive. They crowd out other trees. They create a monoculture. Their seeds are persistent, so they'll travel forever. And they're not necessarily the most desirable tree.
So I know I think in Idaho there's laws against the Russian olive to have it on your property. Do we have that in Utah, or is it just like it's just listed as a weed? Or
no, you are not allowed to sell it.
Okay.
Is the restriction, and if I recall, I want to say it's a Class D.
When did that happen? Because I remember going to a nursery when I was a kid.
In the last 2 to 3 years.
Oh, okay. So it's not that long.
It's something that Releaf and our predecessor, Wasatch Back Trees, which was when we were a small regional organization, we were pretty vocal about getting the Russian olive added to the weed list on there. But sometimes it's it's the controversy of, if I don't have this tree, is there another tree that'll go there? Mm-hmm. Or should I just be happy to have trees? If you drive out the 40 towards Duchesne, and now you might pay attention, you just see acres of Russian olive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But what else is going to grow in that really alkaline, dry, junky soil?
Yeah.
So there's a part of me that thinks that there's really no bad tree. There's just some trees that shouldn't be everywhere.
Yeah. There's a place for those particular.
And I'm not exactly sure where the place for the Russian olive is, but
yeah.
But
they smell great in the spring.
Yeah,
I
they smell
love
great, and the
of them.
flowers are great, and the wood's great. It's just that they're so invasive that they'll take over entire riverbanks and exclude nature, natural flora and fauna. And then also because of their thorns, they can be so dense, they prevent wildlife from getting down to the creek or the river to drink. So they start to exclude and change the wildlife habitat as well.
So, just real quick, let's step back just for a second. As far as the root flare and planting trees that is proper. No. I'm curious because I have a couple of situations of my own. What advice would you give as far as once the tree has been planted that way and it is too deep, it's not dead or dying yet, but now talking about it, what can you do to bring back the health of that tree, or at least try?
So the best thing is first is to try to gently remove the soil till you get down. And not only do we deal with a depth root issue, but we also deal with the portion of the tree that's not adapted to be wet and underground. So the first thing I would do is make sure that you cleared enough soil away from the trunk of the tree to identify the flare so we don't have that potential for decay on there. Sometimes if you pay attention if you're an arborist geek like me, I pay a lot of attention to storms and watching trees that are uprooted or knocked over. And I see a lot of them break off right at the base. And a lot of them also, if you notice, you'll see they always have grass around them. Typically, you don't see a well properly mulched tree that isn't competing with understory vegetation plopped over on there. And it's just one of those.
I love the way that you worded that. That was perfect.
On there. So first get it so that the tree bark there is not being wet. The next thing you can do is start to try to move the soil away out to the perimeter of the trees. And the best way to remedy it, but we only have a couple of them in the state, is to use a device called an air spade. And it's essentially a device that allows us to blow 175 cubic feet per minute of air, and we use the air to gently remove the soil. There's people that also use vacuum trucks, and they've used some water to try to remove that away. And I'd say the best you can to try to get that grade back to where it's flat and even not creating a depression. But a lot of times...
That's what I was curious about, the depression near the trunk.
Yeah, it's just really tough. There's not, my answer is come in an air spade and get everything flat. But, if it were a front yard here, as we drive through the neighborhood, then you create a depression, and that's tough. Sometimes if people are planting in berms, you can pull enough soil away without disturbing the side grade. But really, it's, if there's a mission of one thing of Releaf Utah wants to do is people, please don't plant your trees too deeply. On there, identify the root flare. And use that on whatever tree you're doing. So one of the things, and this gives me a little springboard, is we introduced the first gravel bed nursery in Utah. And this is a concept where we are able to bring in bare root trees in the spring, we put them in gravel, and then we harvest them in the fall and plant them. And during the time they spend in the gravel, they develop an incredible fine root structure around there. So they come in the spring, and they have a little bit of fine roots. We put them in there, and it's boom, roots all over the place.
Cool.
With the bare root tree, we know where the root flare is because there's no soil covering it because it didn't come from the nursery in a pot, or it didn't get taken out of the ground and balled and burlapped. So right off the get-go, with our bare root tree, you can see the proper planting depth. And we've even toyed with the idea of putting some marking paint on it. Plant to the blue level.
Yes.
Make it that simple.
Yeah.
The other benefit that we have with the bare root trees is that we're able to determine any potential structural root defects. We can see them. So another problem that we see after planting too deeply is not disrupting potential girdling roots. So the roots circle, and they're little tiny roots now, and in 20 years they can start to strangle the tree, or they don't allow the tree's roots to start spreading out radially on there. They just keep it in a circle.
Yeah.
So you've recognized that these are issues in the industry, and you guys are actually coming up with solutions on having to how to solve that problem. Because where I've dealt with it, I've had to like cut roots and unbind it and try to get everything going in the right direction. Where half the time I kill the tree,
Yeah.
and the root ball dries up or breaks apart.
Yes.
And so you're eliminating that problem
Yes.
by the way that you guys have started it. That is ingenious.
Yeah, that's great. How long? I'm curious. How long do you have once you pull that tree out of the sand berm?
So what we do once we pull the tree, once we pull it out of the gravel, we dip it in an endo-ectomyza mix with a polymer water-holding gel.
Cool.
We dip it in that, and then we bag it, and we can last up to about a week if they're kept in a protected environment. Obviously, they're in clear plastic bags, which we reuse for the single-use plastic people out there. But it's clear, so on a sunny day, that would cook a root pretty quickly, so we make sure that we tarp those. But in the back of a shaded truck, covered truck, in a garage, in a cool area, they can hang out about a week.
Oh, cool.
Until we get them into the ground.
Can you do most every commercially available tree?
No.
I was going to say, because you have to ship it. Most of the trees that we get are from the Northwest, so they have to ship them here, and then they sit in a lot somewhere waiting for us to buy.
So there are certain species that are more adapted to the bare root technique. So conifers, not so good, unfortunately. My favorite tree, the bur oak, not so good. Most of the American elm hybrids do well, with the exception of the frontier elm. I killed 20 of them last year.
Oh.
I was a little embarrassed because I have it on a slide saying, don't use this tree. And I brought them in to prove it on there. But we have had really great success with London plane tree, crimson sunset maple, a tulip tree, Japanese tree lilacs, 2 varieties of ginkgo biloba, the golden colonnade and the magyar. Our river birch, which is the heritage, is doing great. Our American linden, our little leaf lindens are. I visited the nursery earlier today, as well. Our little leaf lindens were doing great. I've seen a little bit of lack of success in my hornbeams. So I'm not exactly. That's not necessarily my fave, but.
So are you guys still in a phase of figuring out what works and what doesn't, or you kind of have it solidified?
Oh, no. This is
still experimental.
So we started off, this is our second growing season. So we brought in 220 trees in April of 2018. I think we planted about 80 of them, and then the rest of them overwintered. And we only lost maybe 30 trees over winter, which was part of our experiment.
Yeah.
This idea, the technique originated in Missouri, where it's a little bit more humid and not as cold. So people would say, oh, yeah, that works great in Missouri, but it's not going to work in Utah.
Well, even in Camas.
Well, we're in South Salt Lake.
Oh, okay. That's where
I was going to say.
So Camas would be the next move. But one of the things that we like about it is that trees have had a chance to acclimatize, both to the altitude and to the weather and to the humidity, our climate, all the totality of our environment here versus being brought in containers and balled and burlapped and being from the grower, sitting on the lot for one season, maybe 2, and then they're on their way on there. We think that we hope that helps reduce some of the planting stress and increases our successes, but it's too early really to tell.
Yeah.
Exactly. The other great thing about it is that the trees are so much lighter because we're not dealing with 200 pounds of soil that we had to pay from Idaho on there. So rather than 4 people carrying one tree, we have one person carrying 4 trees
that's cool.
in there. So it really, from a volunteer planting perspective and a logistical perspective, it's a game changer for us because as a nonprofit, we don't have machinery. So we either have to rent it or we rely on one of our collaborative partners to give us a hand. And a lot of times that was like the biggest pain of the project was getting the tree from the growing nursery to the planting site because it had all these stops and we had to rely on trucks showing up on time or not on time or going to the wrong place. And we would lose a lot of time that way because we don't have a yard that you'd deliver it to. So we'd be at the planting site. And if they were 2 hours late, we lost 2 hours of our day. So it allowed us to control the delivery or the handling of the trees a lot more. And it also allowed us to increase some of our species selection. So some of the commercially available trees that aren't available, I have some of in the gravel bed nursery because at the beginning of the season, I said, we're going to bring these in on here.
Yeah.
And, there's not a full rhyme or reason to it. Aside from I typically select trees that are water-wise, of course, that have a record of performance here in Utah, which means they generally will tolerate our alkaline soils and our, wide extremes of heat.
Yeah.
And some of our urban trees are better at tolerating pollution and radiant heat and not being cared as well. So
not so much the sweet gum, the American sweet gum.
No.
I love that tree, but
yeah, there's some some really awesome trees that just shouldn't be planted next to houses or shouldn't be planted in Utah. I mean, to me, the aspen is a quintessential example of a tree that was taken out of the wild and it's brought into a landscape environment. They have a life of like 30 years.
Yeah.
There's, a textbook full of pests that go after them. Yeah. And then they sucker and they create these roots. But everybody thinks that, I'm going to have this great self-contained little white tree in my yard. And I sometimes use the analogy as it's like capturing a bobcat kitten and trying to domesticate it.
It's only a matter of time.
Yeah. It really deserves to be out in the woods with all its friends.
Yeah.
On there. And it's kind of, I think it's unkind to the tree to bring it and expect it to perform that way.
Well, I just watched a documentary on how plants are interconnected through their root system. So even that you're taking an aspen away from that and you're isolating it by itself, it doesn't have that support.
No, I use it now just like a human. You put us on an island, one individual on an island, they're not going to be too stoked. Yeah. Unless they're kind of warped on there. So the aspens are so very social in there, and they really do depend. And that whole root talking thing is so awesome. I don't know. There was a post. I don't know if you saw it about the zombie stump.
Yes, I did.
That's being kept alive by its neighboring trees.
Huh.
I did. It's see just
that is so awesome to me.
Well, and do you think that the mycorrhizae, the endo and ecto that you guys apply help with that root success and maybe compatibility?
With the root success, I think so. Some research suggests that if you're planting in decent soil, there's already a microbial presence there.
Okay.
But they haven't visited Utah.
Oh, right.
Most of this, don't do this. We don't need to soil amend. We don't need this. I've seen kind of goes out the window in this state because I have yet to find really super awesome soil yet. I know it's out there. Yeah. But I haven't had a chance to plant in it. So I believe it's important that we do bring in to create, the full soil environment with the microorganisms, the fungi and the bacteria and the roots and the trees and the different plants and the insects. It's all part of the big picture of getting the most we can out of our trees. And one of the things that we've been pioneering also is the use of biochar in our tree plantings. So for those of you that aren't familiar, biochar is the product of organic material that's heated to a temperature in the absence of oxygen, and it decomposes through the process called pyrolysis. And simplistically, what it does is it creates little sponges, and the sponges are able to hold on to nutrients and water. They also provide structure to our clay soil here. They help break it up a little bit to our predominantly clay soil. Again, I know there's if we had callers, the lines would be light. I don't have clay soil. I have sand.
Right.
But it gives us it helps us improve the soil. And The concept of using the biochar is not new. It was discovered in the Amazon River Basin where they would find plots of super soil. As it turns out, the indigenous cultures would improve their soils so that they could grow food along the river, because the river, and contrary maybe to popular belief, the Amazon doesn't have a whole lot of great soil because all the nitrogen and carbon's in the canopy, it's in the plants. So trying to grow food in that soil could be really tough, so they found out that they had to modify their soil to improve their food yields and ultimately to become sustainable. The second cool thing about using biochar, if it's produced in the right way, and there's a bunch of different ways out there, and we could spend hours talking about it, but if it's produced in the right way in a closed environment, it reduces the amount of carbon that's released from the stock into the air. So when we let something compost or our wood chips decay, we're releasing carbon dioxide through that process. This actually holds it, sequesters it in place, turns it into the biochar. And if it's heated into the right temperature, they collect the off-gassing, and they've been experimenting with using it as a biofuel. The biggest issue they have in the West right now is the product that comes off is similar to like number 2 fuel oil, and we're not a big fuel oil community out here the way the Northeast is. So still finding some uses for that. But it gives us a way, instead of just taking a big slash pile when we were doing forest treatment plans and burning it and sending it all up into the sky, we can turn around and keep that carbon here and actually leave it as part of the soil. And I'm going to go as far to suggest that we are starting to simulate the effects of what a wildfire would have been without having the wildfire. Because once those trees burn, that little charcoal black there is in the soil. It gets worked in. We see what happened in Yellowstone from the fires in 89, 90, 91. Yeah. They've come back on there. So instead of doing a treatment where we might have to thin out some fuel, get rid of some dead trees to improve it, and then just letting that decompose, we've actually recreated, again, a wildfire event to improve the health of the aspen stands in particular in this particular situation. So I think the biochar is really cool, but it's got a while to go.
Yeah. Where could somebody pick that up? I mean,
well, we're supplied a company called Amaron Energy, which is in Salt Lake City. Is where we buy it. We buy it in these 2-yard super sacks, and it's not inexpensive. It's somewhere between $300 and $400 a cubic yard. And I understand you can buy it at Target in like a 1 cubic foot bag. On there. I think it's a great way to amend soils. Colorado's really taken a lead, one of the leads with it, but it's exploding everywhere across the United States. I have friends in Louisiana that are doing a seedling experiment with it. And I think one of the keys I'll throw out real quick is if you're going to use it in planting, you need to pre-charge it with some sort of nitrogen. We mix it up with compost before we blend it into our soil. On there, other people mix it up with poultry manure or composted steer manure, but you need to charge it up. There's been some instances where people have suggested that the biochar has actually tied up the carbon and reduced the vegetative yield for the first year, if you will. So if you're
while
doing,
it's breaking down, it ties that.
It's actually tying up what's broken down. So the biochar itself is technically close to inert. On there, but it's a sponge, so it's absorbing all that nitrogen that was running around in the soil available for the plant. So in that time period, the plant may not have all the nutrients it needs, but in the second year, once the biochar has a chance to be charged, if you will, the performance results have been phenomenal.
That's great.
And so when we do trees, a lot of our preparation, I talked earlier about adequate quantity and quality of soil, we make sure that we mix in enough in a minimum of 10 by 10 by 3 foot planting site. And our concept is by the time the tree roots get to the soil that we've amended, it's had a chance to absorb its nutrients and to create the colonies again of the myco and endo and ectorrhiza and all the cool things that make soil productive.
Yeah. So is Releaf Utah, is that your full-time? I mean, is that what you do?
I wish. No.
Okay.
I have a private consulting practice called Arbor Docs. I specialize in municipal forestry, doing tree inventories, tree management plans. I work with small communities and HOAs.
Nice.
I spent some time with South Salt Lake as their urban forester on a contracted basis on there.
Arbor Docs.
Arbor Docs.
Okay. Yeah.
And so you drive all the way down from Camas every day?
No, I didn't have to drive every day.
Oh, okay.
From that, that was the plus of being a municipal forester or consulting arborist is a lot of my work is drawing plans, collecting data, doing tree inventories, using a lot of modern technology. We can use remote sensing or satellites, different imagery, and we can calculate the ecosystem benefits of trees simply from a satellite photo. So in the business, we call it an urban tree canopy assessment, or if you're with the real cool kids, a UTC. So, when we get to go, hey, I heard you're doing a UTC. Like, oh, that's cool on there. But that's one way to take a snapshot and to see all of the benefits of all of the trees in any given geographical location. The other thing that we do is what's called a tree inventory. We'll actually gather data on each individual tree. And primarily that's on trees that are in public property. And it's just like most cities, well, I don't know of a city that doesn't, but if they have vehicles, they have a fleet person. And they can tell you almost everything about that car, truck, van, when the oil was changed, what the air pressures were, how many miles it has on it, what they paid on it, what it depreciated. But when you ask somebody to do that about the public green assets that we have, we kind of get a look like, yeah, they're cool.
They're green.
They're green.
But how? Yeah, but
yeah, they're shady.
How are they doing? That's
well, yeah.
a good question.
And so, with the help of Utah Forestry, Fire, and State Lands over the last, I guess it's been 8 years now, there's been a big movement to get communities to do a tree inventory, to know what they have. And when you know what you have, then you know how to budget for it. And it makes sense. Mm-hmm. But when you're like, oh, yeah, these trees are great, and they're green and cool, and I need $100,000 for a budget, a lot of people start to look at you.
Yeah.
Kind of funny. I've had to explain in the past, when we do an urban tree planting project, my initial starting budget is $1,500 per tree. Now, that includes irrigation infrastructure. A lot of times, if we're planting in an area, they don't even have a stop and waste or a backflow or a controller, so we have to put that in, and that is not inexpensive in there. It includes, we like to use drip line. I'm a big fan of Netafin drip line, double rings for new planted trees on there to give them a nice long soak. That includes 3 years of after maintenance. That includes the cost of the biochar and the compost and the cost of remediating the soil. It's the cost of the stakes, the wooden stakes that we put in to stabilize the tree. And that's a big debate, actually, the stakes. I say use them when you have to. Just make sure you come back and take them off.
Right.
There's been a move. You have to, you don't. You do, you don't. If you're in a windy area, it's not a bad idea. It takes a couple minutes to put in a wooden stake, and then we use this soft webbing called arbor tie now. So we're not using rubber bands, we're not using wire, we're not using rope, all that. We're using this nice soft webbing. And the nice thing about the wood posts is if they don't pull out in here, they break at the base. So there's nothing there.
Yeah.
They're rounder, so they don't have sharp edges like a T-post would, and easier to come out of the ground. And the webbing that we use is less damaging to the tree bark, and it's also easier to see if somebody were to accidentally run into it, and it's not going to harm them the way a piece of wire.
Like a wire, for sure, yeah. So
my just since we're on staking, because I have a stake tree.
Yeah, I saw it.
And I've tried not to stake it. I've tried to take it out, and I get enough wind that it'll push it over. And it's only been in for, I think this is it overwintered, but we're coming up on the year mark. But what'd you think of my stake?
I like the use of the stake.
Loose. It's very loose.
And I'm just not exactly sure about about that rubberized wire tie.
Yeah.
On there. I have those in my truck for other uses, but I've been a big fan of a 3/4 inch wide flat piece of webbing. to do that. I think probably, the rubberized component probably is in your favor in that particular situation on there. I think it's, knowing what you're using it for, it's an okay application.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I would endorse it wholesale to go out and buy the cool ties and use those on your trees.
I think that's just what I had, and I was like, it's better than, I knew not to tie it super tight.
Yep. I
used to have just a loop, and then it was tied to the stake, so it could just kind of sway around in the loop. Then I had to change it out. I think I used like a tubing, like some irrigation tubing, and I put it inside a wire. And
that was kind of the old schooler way that we do it. And I still have a collection of old garden hoses in our storage unit in case we ever get back to that on there. But it's just, the webbing that we utilize is just it really is a lot easier to utilize because it's one part on there. It's not a 2 or a 3-part system. I'll make sure I leave you a piece of it.
That'd be awesome.
Afterwards. But that's, to anybody that listens, if you are going to support your tree, put anything around it, make sure that you really protect it. And when we stake the majority of our trees, the goal is not to have the tree immobile. We want a little bit of slack in each of those guys because as the tree moves, its reaction to that movement is to strengthen itself and to develop roots. So if you left a tree staked for its entire life, it's never going to develop that strength to withstand the wind. Now, you're in that interesting, probably grew a little bit taller than it should have right now, so it does need a little extra support. But the key is to pay attention. Submit that some trees, maybe they need to stay staked for 3 or 4 years. But the real key, the biggest issue, is the tree going around the strapping material. I can't tell you the number of wires and hoses that are now parts of trees because those materials weren't removed. And it also depends on how quickly the tree grows. My friends in Louisiana went 9 months and had trees starting to grow around their strapping material around there. And I was like,
Wow.
But, humid, warm, stuff grows. Cold, dry, not as easily.
Thanks.
Yeah, so,
that's why
why
we're having this chat here is to share what we've all learned about growing stuff in Utah. Maybe they could grow anything in Louisiana or Hawaii or whatever.
Yeah.
But grow something in Utah. Come on.
Can they even call themselves gardeners? I mean, please.
Yeah, really.
It just spontaneously comes.
So I just wanted to ask, what is your? To say what is your favorite tree is maybe kind of ridiculous. because there's so many possibly, but
I have 3-ish that I've kind of narrowed down.
Okay.
The bur oak is one of my super faves.
Yeah.
I had to knock it back a little bit because there was a study out of Berlin that showed that bur oaks under stress can reduce volatile organic compounds that can degrade air quality on there. And it surprised me a lot because I thought actually we would see more of that behavior or production from like conifers, evergreens, turpentine, the nice smells. But a stressed out bur oak actually produces more VOCs. So my answer to that is just plant it correctly so it's not stressed out.
Okay.
I love the ginkgo biloba.
Yeah.
It's a fossil tree, unchanged for millions of years, super tough. It's a slow-growing tree, but it's got really cool kind of butterfly-like leaves that are super neat. You just want to make sure, and not that they're readily available, but you really want to try to make sure you plant a male ginkgo biloba. The females drop a fruit that is one of the it's an assault on the olfactory senses. It may be worse. It may be worse than a flowering pear tree. As far as the odor goes, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
You never smelled it?
I have not.
A ginkgo?
I've heard all about it.
They stanky.
Okay.
Yeah. And I grew up walking to school past female ginkgo bilobas, so for a while I was like, why do I like this tree?
I think one of the very first podcasts we did, I put it in the recommended ones that I liked, ginkgo, and someone was like, yeah, but they can revert back to being a female.
Yeah,
and I'm like, in like 100 years.
Yeah, again, as the disclaimer earlier, that trees will disprove every statement that I make.
That's so freaking true.
Here. Yeah, they will, and, to me, that'd be cool. Like
I know, that's
I'd be
so
like
true.
tooting my horn. Hey, come see my tree.
It totally changed.
You know, it completely changed. So yeah,
That's pretty cool.
It could do that, and you know, if we plant a tree and it lasts 100 years and it converts to dropping what I call them stink berries.
Okay.
Yeah.
God bless the tree.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
knock yourself out,
deserve it.
tree. Yeah, exactly.
You've earned it.
And then on the smaller side, I really like the Japanese tree lilac as a nice flowering tree
With those white cones, kind of.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I think it's a really good alternative to crab apples as your smaller flowering tree of choice.
Yeah.
Not to say that the crab apple isn't a great tree in a lot of great places, but I think they tend to be overused, and especially in Summit County, where we're based out of. We have like 5 tree species up there. We have crab apples, choke cherries, cottonwoods, aspen, and blue spruce.
Wow.
You know,
Only
Yeah.
ones.
well then you throw
Crab apples. That's the suckers of crab apples are just outrageous.
They can be, but again, a lot of that has to do with the initial planting site.
I guess so.
If
yeah.
you gave the tree enough soil that it could go out laterally and be happy without having to pop its heads up, we don't see that suckering behavior as prominently on there. And again, my neighbors have a choke cherry in their front yard that they had an issue with. And it was classic when we were starting to dig it out, is you could see the soil that the tree came in, and then you saw the native Utah soil, which is clay rock in Camas Valley, with the 3 inches of topsoil. And the roots went out, up the clay, and into the topsoil. And then they start suckering. Like crazy.
It's a
on there.
distressed response, I'm sure.
They don't have the
Wow.
nutrients. And,
Yeah, so, hey, I can't go out any further wider, so I'm going to start going up now.
Yeah.
And so I see that happens a lot with trees when you plant them in restricted spaces, whether it's a 4-foot cutout in a sidewalk or just a 4-foot hole in our compacted, challenging soils here. I've brought a lot of what I've learned about urban forestry, planting in the concrete jungle, and I've applied that to the soils that I encounter or have encountered over the last 12 years here in Utah.
Yeah.
On there. I meant compacted urban soil, subdivision, subgrade left behind because they took all the topsoil away when they built this place to sell it back to us.
Yes. And the heat, that I mean, that's another thing that trees kind of would need to overcome is the amount of heat from the urban areas.
Yeah. So, one of the things, that brings up and I know I'm going all over the place, but one of our programs with Releaf Utah is to encourage the planting of the trees in people's yards and not the parking strips, unless the parking strip is 8 feet wide.
We got 8 feet wide one. Sorry. Keep going.
No, those are great. But sometimes, and even out there, and the reason being is we get that newly planted tree that all of a sudden we're expecting to deal with pollution and salt and radiant heat from the blacktop. We just planted it and we now expect it to do okay. But if we moved it 10 feet on the other side of that sidewalk and gave it a whole unencumbered yard to grow in, we're going to be a lot more excited about it. Yeah. Plus, we then don't have to deal with the issues when we deal with snow removal. Trees and parking strips sometimes can be a pain or they get damaged. In that scenario, there are ways to design sidewalks and hardscapes to coexist with trees, but that isn't used very much here in Utah. There are things called silvacells, which essentially are a structure that the sidewalk can sit on, and then decent uncompacted soil is underneath it, and the roots can go through and get across into the rest of the soil into the yard. And then there's also a product called structural soil. It's pioneered by Cornell University. And I think the trademark CU structural soil is the best. There are other structural soils out there. You can put that underneath a sidewalk, and the tree roots will grow underneath it.
Okay.
So if you plan for it, you can plant trees closer to the street. But our goal was to increase survivability, increase soil volume, and get them away from all the damaging influences that come from the street.
I was just going to say with hempcrete, is kind of a new
favorite
thing.
subject.
Okay.
This is his favorite subject.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's so porous that the water from rains and from whatever else can permeate through that hard surface.
There has been challenges in Utah with the use of porous
Because of freezing.
hardscapes
Okay.
on there. So I know there's been a couple pilot plans that USU has implemented in Logan and I think Ogden.
Okay.
And the last I heard, they were looking for a different supplier of the materials. So porous,
Yes.
porous concrete.
Yeah.
I've
Needs
seen
to be flexible, but yet
Yeah.
porous, flexible, but yet hard.
yes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
Where are we at?
So we had I worked as a gardener at the University of Utah for a while, and one of my areas that I kept track of was the natural museum, the Museum of Natural Resources up there, the Dinosaur Museum and stuff. So they had a permeable concrete parking lot, and I also had to take care of. We had someone else installed it, so that was like the big thing that we had issue with. Is these companies would come in and install everything on campus. We couldn't do anything with it. We couldn't even watch them. Like after they misplanted everything, we had to redo it. And make, but we had to water them all in, and but we had these big tooth maples. They were multi-stem big tooth maples, and they were all buried from 6 inches to a foot too deep. So we had to dig them all out, but it took a while for us to figure it out because we didn't do it right. And then there was rocks. There's all these rocks, mulch covering. So we had to move everything away, cut into the weed fabric, and then dig down and find that root flare. So we were like, from where the rocks were, we were at least a foot deep. And I had my soil knife, and it was just like, whoop, I couldn't even find it. And so to eliminate that, and last time I looked, I drove through, they all looked good.
But
But
you
we had
lifted them up,
dieback.
you brought them up.
We didn't bring them up. We
Okay.
just did it. We just got it down to where, like what you were saying, just get it off of the trunk.
Yeah.
And we did the best to like smooth it out.
Yeah, sometimes it's just, you know,
Took us months.
It's really hard to correct the issue. I mean, it's the simple adage, just do it right the first time.
Right.
You know, and when people look at me when I tell them how much I'm budgeting, I like to also use the analogy is to buy once, cry once. So, yeah, maybe it is painful to spend that much at the beginning, but I can guarantee it's a lot less than having to try to remedy it once it's already in place, and then even harder 10 or 20 years when they start to struggle and you say, why are they struggling? And you come in and you say, well, because...
Yeah.
So it was 3 years after they installed it that we were seeing the effects of the...
Yeah, and that's fairly typical.
Yeah. So
you
that
know,
whole,
like they
that
can
whole
weather...
1 year thing is...
You know, trees are tough enough that they can weather the abuse to... The causation of the problem usually is distant enough from what it's causing that nobody thinks about that it was their fault, if you will. And I'll use the analogy kind of as like, you know, the growing nursery needs their tree to make it from there to the retail or the wholesale nursery here. The wholesale nursery just needs to get it to the retail nursery. Retail nursery needs to get it, maybe live for a year. Or to get it to the landscaper, the landscaper needs to let it live for a year. I mean, you could drop containerized trees and mulch them, and they'd live for a year.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
This reminds me of so I went to the Green Conference, I think this was like 3 or 4 years ago, and this the keynote speaker was a professor from, I think it was Michigan University, or somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
and
he lost me.
He was talking about how he had this dead... they removed a tree, they cut it down, and the people of his heads or whatever, the university heads, needed mature trees, and it was in the dead of winter. And he knew he was going to remove these trees. He cut it, and he just planted it in the stump, and it actually was green through spring. Like, it looked fine because it was, I mean, so he had this little forest of dead trees.
Yeah.
And no one knew.
You know, I was just reading something that a lot of times the trees will not show signs of root damage until 50 to 60% of the roots are damaged or rotted. Whether it's it was an article I think on Phytophthora, which is a fungus, and they actually blamed nurseries for bringing it in, and then the resultant overwatering that we seem to be inclined to do here sometimes also encouraged this. But essentially, what they're saying is the problem has already done its damage by the time we see it happen. And that's so true in the trees. And that's, again, why I'm kind of in this proactive, let's do it right at the beginning stage. I joke with people that one of my goals is to put my private consulting practice out of business. If we could get everybody to plant the trees the correct depth and water them properly and make sure the roots aren't girdling, I wouldn't have to come out and diagnose a 20-year-old tree and say this is why it's not happy.
Yeah.
Have you been able to locate a resource that people can go to that they can find more about how to do proper planting techniques? Or
our website, ReleafUtah.org, has links, and we occasionally chat about that. We have sort of moved, well, I shouldn't say we, but Facebook is our kind of platform now. We've spent more time in that. It seems to be more dynamic than trying to keep a website up to date. It seems like people don't go to websites.
Yeah.
So, that's another, join the Releaf Utah Facebook page, and I'm constantly reposting articles on cool stuff about trees. The other site that's probably easy to remember is treesaregood.org. It's the ISA website for consumers, if you will, and it has all sorts of great ways to plant, ways to prune. Another great resource, and if everybody went to these, I wouldn't get hired, but that's okay. If you go to I think it's the University of Florida, Ed Gilman, he has a whole lot of great stuff. And Dr. Gilman has been a big mover in both pruning techniques and improving nursery stock on there. So it's some of his lectures that kind of motivated me to say, all right, well, the balled and burlap is kind of a pain and it has this issue, and the containerized trees have this issue, and we can correct these issues in these manner, or we'll just go to bare root on there. But he has a host of information that talks about different types of pruning, commercial nursery techniques, a whole lot of stuff that's really, really, really cool and accessible, and we just wish more people would read it and utilize it and put it into practice. And even though his research comes from the University of Florida, I can bear out a lot of what he has taught, and we've done it here with success. Some of it is pruning a little bit more aggressively at times. If there's structural issues with the tree, codominant stems or deformed, the rule of not pruning more than 25% of the tree at any given moment, he said, don't throw it out the window, but if the tree needs to be pruned, then prune it.
Yeah.
On there. And he's done some great, we're all kind of like, 25%, we're going to, that guy took 32% off.
Right.
That tree's going to die. We found that some of this aggressive, more aggressive pruning with the right species in the right conditions is cool.
Yeah.
We don't have to be as dogmatic as so many people in every industry seems to be. It's just kind of let's learn about it. And I joke about this, and I sometimes say you learn the rules to break the rules on there. And obviously there are some rules that should never be broken.
Right.
But in the planting business, they're more sort of guidelines. And it's sort of, if you understand the ultimate reason behind the guideline, then you can intelligently choose to deviate from it and understand the consequences. If there was a failure, you're going to say, well, it's because I didn't listen to X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
Or I chose to do this different on there. But at least there's something to refer to. There's a point of reference to get us started in the right direction. And ultimately, the more that we share our experiences with each other, both within the state, within our different communities, within our different, we have so many governmental organizations that own property in Utah. It's mind-boggling. From special rec districts to school districts to utilities to federally owned to state owned to locally owned. We've got all these different places, and sometimes we remain isolated in these little groups and we don't share with each other among the larger groups. And there's just so much great information that we could share and ultimately benefit everybody.
Yeah. So do you have a difficult time
yes.
getting getting enough volunteers? I can't imagine. Like how do people find you to help?
So we've had our greatest successes actually leading corporate and other group projects.
Uh-huh.
So if a group we're going to be doing the gardener term, I guess, is weeding. The arborist term is we're going to be removing competitive understory vegetation.
Okay, right.
Underneath the trees, and we're going to be putting some mulch down with a corporate group, and so rings, which I think is just an American fork.
Okay.
This will be the second year that they've worked with us. They bring 75 volunteers. We work for 2 to 4 hours.
Wow.
And we get a lot done. I've got another group that is coming into town for a national sales meeting. We haven't nailed this one down yet. It's still in the proposal stages, but they're proposing bringing 250 to 300 volunteers to work for 3 to 4 hours.
Heck yeah.
So, and they're also bringing funding. So that's typically where we have our greatest successes. We've had open plantings, if you will. We're like, hey, come and join us.
Sure.
And it is really, really, really challenging to get people to show up.
I was wondering about that, yeah.
On there. It seems to me that unless there's an anchor, whether it's an Eagle Scout project, or a corporate group or something, kind of are like, hey, come out and sign up and show up and plant trees, doesn't work super well in that. And then getting the associated funding is incredibly difficult. This is with all nonprofits, but, our administrative costs are there. And those of us that work would like to remain slightly competitive with private industry on there. And that money doesn't just, grow on trees,
Right.
unfortunately, or we'd be doing great.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
So, like getting just, money for insurance. I mean, our general liability insurance policy is like $2,100 on that. And people don't contemplate those costs. They want to give money to buy a tree, and that's typically it on there. We try to budget in our tree projects. We budget for the 3 years of aftercare, which most people don't. They plan it, and even though they say they're going to look at it, they don't because there was no funding for it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's even a curse, where somebody volunteered so many trees that then the local organization doesn't have the capacity to take care of it. So, when we do our planning and our funding and all of this, we really like to use, I hate the term sustainability. I think it's way overused. But we try to do a project that, again, is going to result in trees living for 100 years.
Yeah.
And if I have a chance to communicate with somebody, on a level and share with them what's going about, they're cool with it. But, there was just the article or the report that came out, I think, from the journal Science that boiled down to the headline was plant 3 trillion trees for 30 cents a piece and we'll save the world on there. And there was some cool stuff that came out of the study, but nobody read that. They read the headline and they read 30 cents a tree. And then I say $1,500 a tree. And there's this huge disconnect on there. And again, you want to look to what are they planting trees? Or are they planting seeds? Or seedlings, or saplings.
Right, at 30 cents.
What are they doing? What's the survival rate? And again, as I said, Hawaii, Missouri,
Russian olive.
Yeah,
as far as the eye can see.
Yeah, but that would count towards our billion tree initiative.
Yeah.
So part of me is like, you need to think about the right tree in the right places, and it's different everywhere. What grows here doesn't grow there, and it may cost more here. Or, one of the other topics that we try to address is environmental justice and improving health conditions in underserved neighborhoods. There's studies out that show that the closer a pregnant woman lives to a tree, the higher birth weight her baby is. And so, again, I do a little extrapolation, and I say bigger baby, that means less premature baby. And less premature babies means less costs on there. And if we could plant a couple trees and avert just one premature birth, we've just saved the healthcare system $500,000, $1 million. And we've taken a person that may struggle to be a contributing member of society, and we just bumped them up to booyah, we're going to be kicking butt. Yeah. Grades go up, crime goes down. I mean, there's a study that came out of Philadelphia that showed firearm violence reduced where tree canopy goes up. I mean, if there's a non-controversial way to address what's going on right now, let's plant trees.
Yeah.
Come on, because not only are they going to do that, but they do a bunch, they clean our air for us. They're deposition surfaces for particulate matter. I meant the stacks of peer-reviewed research is like we could fill this room with it. And it sometimes can get really frustrating. And as I'm getting passionate about it, it's like, I just need to throw one of these at you. And I got a whole room of things to throw at you that you should be able to act on, and there should not be a question. But it gets bogged down from we want shade to actually planting the tree. There's a lot of stuff that ends up getting in the way along the way. And part of it is just getting everybody, we had a really cool meeting with landscape architects, nursery people, and urban foresters about a month and a half ago.
Nice.
And it was so great to be able to share finally. And these landscape architects were like, well, why didn't you tell us that? And we're like, we've been trying to tell you guys for 30 years about this stuff. And I love my landscape architect friends. I just, I encourage them to get out from behind the desk and go see the result of their projects every now and then. Because that nice green circle in the middle of the parking lot that you designed that you expected to become big and shade the parking lot is still 6 feet tall and 6 feet wide.
Stressed out.
12 years later.
It's not going to grow. Yeah.
It just they're crabapple trees in Kimball Junction in Park City that I seem to be about the same size they were when they planted them. Now, I'm sure they've grown a little on there, but that's just that component of it is connecting, and the same with the nursery people. Part of me is like we've potted up a couple of our bare root trees, and there's a part of me that thinks that extra soil is to provide some stability in the pot.
Oh, yeah.
On there, you got that extra soil there,
yeah.
so now you don't have the wiggle going on.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, that's cool, but just tell us. Tell us you did it. Put on a sticker, remove 4 inches of soil upon planting. Or something to identify as it goes down the line, because there's so many places for it to go awry. I mean, the landscape architect could write the best plan ever, but they didn't talk with the local nursery, so they spec'd out species that aren't available. And then the landscaper makes a substitution on the fly, and instead of getting a bunch of cool trees, we get a monoculture of Canada red chokecherries. And again, not a terrible tree, but overused, suckering has its place.
Yeah. It's so freaking true.
On there, it's just, and part of it is species diversity. Another simple thing, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So I'm not a fan of planting a single tree in a row. I like to mix it all up, and I know that probably messes with design sensibilities.
No, it's good. It actually adds to it, because you have these different colors and textures and weight lines and the leaves, and mixing conifers with other vegetative. I mean, it makes it more appealing.
I certainly think so, but
see the contrast. But people like uniformity. They and I think it's boring. I mean, if you go to Paris, that's all it is. It's all freaking uniformity, and it's so beautiful, these trees. They hedge their London plane trees.
Oh, they pollard them.
Oh, pollard. They're like freaking squares.
Yeah.
And it's like, how much?
Or not pollering. God, I should know this.
Espalier or
no.
No,
it's a
Milwaukee.
Origami. No, just kidding.
No, gosh. I should know this because I have a client in the Avenues that's done this to his London plane trees.
Really? When you say it, we're going to be like, oh, geez.
Yeah. It begins with a P, and it can involve scaffolding and the sort, and you try to interconnect the branches of the trees.
Oh, wow.
On there.
A little bit more than I think.
Yeah, well, PLA something. Placar. I want to say Picard.
Right.
Looking over at your Star Trek picture there. It's Picarding the tree. but
he was French.
But the part of the whole deal is actually a lot of these trees are raised from growing to be suited for this. So they start pruning the tree when it's little.
Yeah.
Okay.
Training.
So for us to take an untrained London plane tree and then to try to do it, it can be pretty challenging.
Yeah.
To do. But yeah, that whole uniformity, London plane trees down both sides of the street, it's all great. And, it is great in some perspectives until, the London plane ash borer gets here.
Right.
Or, the emerald ash borer is what I'm actually referring to, is
Yeah.
so many cities in the Midwest, back of the East, planted ash trees along their streets, and now there's no trees on the streets.
Yeah.
And it's a really, almost disturbing imagery. It really hits home why it's a good idea to kind of diversify age, species, everything. Cause
that was one of our earlier episodes, was diversity in trees that we tried to hammer home. Even with trees that we have here in Utah, maybe we don't have the biggest urban forestry palette as other places, but we could still
there's a lot of trees we could
things.
utilize that we don't.
Yeah.
Our palette is significantly smaller.
What's a underutilized tree that you would suggest for people to look into, other than maybe your favorites that we've already talked about?
Boy, I don't know if I've seen the American or the little leaf lindens used enough. I think there's more space for that. There's so many cool varieties that are coming out that have been bred to deal with some of the deficiencies of the trees. There's so many different cultivars. J.F. Schmidt is, for super geeks. If you go to their site, they're a production nursery. They have patent pending species. So you can go to their catalog and go, oh my God, this is so cool. We're using a Crimson Sunset Maple, which is a Acer cross truncatum. And it's got cool characteristics. It's a good street tree, less susceptible to sun scald, less susceptible to iron chlorosis, which is some of our typical problems, which I even saw across the street as I drove down here. One of those autumn blaze maples, which I'm pretty sure that's what it was, is looking a little chlorotic.
as it goes.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, we've had some success in the Camas Valley with the autumn blaze maples, but typically down here, they were a tree that kind of got a good rep and maybe got overused, and some of the deficiencies are starting to show as they've been in 5, 10, 15 years. The flowering, it's almost like I'm better at which trees not to plant. Yeah. Please don't plant flowering pears.
Right.
I'm embarrassed to say that they were a tree of the year by the Society of Municipal Arborists back in 2001 or something.
Oh, wow.
And that's kind of egg on our faces. We're kind of like, who came up with that idea?
Yeah.
On there. Because they're, they're described by Michael Durr, who's one of the seminal sources. Everybody, what's Durr say?
Yeah.
And he says it's a great tree for the first 20 years and then it falls apart. On there, it said it's got so many great characteristics, and then it literally just falls apart at 20 years old.
You'd have to do some massive pruning from the beginning to get those branches to be able to do.
Yeah, and then there's still a susceptibility to fire blight, and then the malodorous component of their flowers, and they're just not
they stinky.
Really. I'd rather see the Chinese tree lilac. Out there. It's Syringa picanesis is another cool variety of tree to utilize. There's a couple different subspecies of Zelkovas that can be utilized. But one of the things to be careful, and I noticed this out here, and some people do, they instantly think that a small tree is a street tree. That's not usually the case, actually, because a lot of places, well, maybe not a lot of places in Utah, but there should be an expectation to be able to provide 15 feet of vehicle clearance and 8 feet of pedestrian clearance on there. And if you're only planting a tree that's only going to get 15 feet tall, how are you going to pull that off when those crab apples or whatever somebody's planted in a park strip tops out at 15 feet, and you're never going to get the UPS truck underneath it?
No.
So a lot of times you need to, if you don't have overhead obstructions, you probably should be considering a medium-sized tree for those situations.
Yeah.
Or you may want to be more columnar. But look at the form of the mature tree that you're planting, and just don't think, oh, this is a small spot, so I'm going to put a small tree in. And I had a urban designer person that works with the municipality start throwing these city sprite Japanese tree or Zelkovas in 3-foot parking strips. And there's no way they would ever get large enough for us to get that clearance. But if you read the book, it says Japanese Zelkova is a good street tree. Mm-hmm. Or it's a big tree. And so kind of you got this mix where she got lulled into, it's a good street tree, it's small, oh, it must be great to plant in this scenario. So really looking and figuring out and thinking through the right tree for the right place. I sometimes joke it's just my lack or incredible imagination, lack of boundaries when I'm thinking, that allows me to kind of extrapolate what the trees are going to do and see what's going to happen and try to suggest to people to do something a little bit different so that they don't have that problem in 20 years.
Yeah.
So I just had have you been keeping track of the juniper die out?
No.
You haven't been watching that at all?
No. Where?
It's in southeastern Utah.
Okay.
There's a lot of, they don't know why.
Wow.
They're not sure. They're not sure if it's because of the drought. They're not sure if there's a pest that's been introduced.
Well, that's interesting because the juniper and particularly the pinyon juniper ecosystems, it sometimes are not encouraged.
Yeah.
The state and federal people are doing pinyon juniper treatments where they're pulling them out and maybe biochar them.
Yeah.
On there. So no, I haven't heard about that going down.
I think there's a new study starting. Like they just got funding to be able to do a new study for it. Just figure it out.
Oh, well, it's I'm
not sure if it's. I'm not sure I'm not sure which juniper it is. Like if it's the Utah juniper or something else.
Now I'd say probably our the insect I've been most concerned with lately is the balsam woolly adelgid, which has been attacking our fir trees. So, we had our pine beetles and our spruce beetles and finally thought, hey, the white firs aren't going to get hit. And we've been seeing this BWA probably 3 years ago is when it first started out. And in the Park City, Summit County area, you can see the dead orange trees in the stands where they've been getting hit. And there isn't necessarily a great answer to it except for water, but not too much. Because some of our extra water help facilitate fungus growth, so we're like,
balance it.
Darned if we do, darned if we don't. Like, okay, drought, everything's stressed out. Now we're going to give you so much water, we're going to let molds and mildews and everything else hit you on the next side.
Yeah.
On there, I've seen a lot of actually incidents of poplar borer and aspens, and resulting cytosporic canker infections. Seems to be on the radar in the last couple of weeks. Multiple clients, and exactly explain it. I meant, to me, it's the trees were stressed for a long time, and 1 year of water does not counter 10 to 12 years of water stress. And, the best thing we could do is pray for rain or water the forest.
Right.
We've talked to some larger landowners, ski resorts and the sort. Said, hey, this island of trees here is pretty important to y'all. Maybe you should think about firing up that snowmaking system and getting some water on your high-value trees on there if you want to continue to have tree skiing on there. There's some different ways to encourage people to take care of their trees, kind of, sneaking it in on them, tricking them into taking care of their trees on there. But that's one on a ski, like in a ski.
Well,
we've encouraged our ski resort people.
Brian Head Resort.
Yeah,
and it was the pine beetle, right? That knocked out.
Yeah,
a bunch of their pines up in the.
Yeah, and while you look in the Uintas, Soapstone Basin and above, Wolf Creek Pass, the amount of mortality from, I just generally call them bark beetles now. Okay. Each conifer has generally its own specific little bugger that does kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Just, on its limited range of species that it prefers to chew on there. But again, drought, and then maybe, we could get off and, maybe we should harvest some more of it. Maybe we should let wildfires burn. We could go off on a whole nother discussion on how to properly manage our forests that we've now kind of intruded in by just being here on there. But yeah, it's just a tough deal. Now, one of the things that they're doing up cool in Montana, which we haven't pulled off here, is they've been harvesting the blue stain beetle-killed lumber. They kiln dry it. That's the key, the kiln. Mm-hmm. And then they sell it as a value-added decorative product. Because the beetles bring in a little fungus. The fungus is blue. It goes in and goes into the veins and the vascular structures of the tree and gives this kind of denim-y blue stain look
no kidding.
To it. Yeah, no, it's they're sustainable timber, I believe they're called, in Missoula, Montana, has made a business out of collecting their beetle kill, kiln drying it, and reselling it.
Wow, brilliant.
Around here, one of our issues is, some of the hoops that we have to jump through to manage our forests because of how it's owned. And yeah. I, in no way, am an advocate for going out and clear cutting, but there are times that bulldozers and chainsaws are very healthy for our forests. And again, we need to look at the scenarios. We shouldn't just be, reacting to the input. Oh, they're going to cut them down, so it must be bad. Let's sue them. Let's start to really look at the details of a particular project and evaluate it on its merits and not the dogma that it might challenge.
That's a pretty good place to end.
Yeah, that's great.
But thank you, Jason, for coming.
Oh, so fun.
Thank you so much.
Fun.
All right, well, there we go. That was Jason Berto with Releaf Utah. Thank you so much, Jason, for coming on the podcast. It was so freaking awesome. Just listening to it again, I'm just like, yes, trees are the answer, and I love you. Let's do this thing. So that was great. Thank you to Brad for doing this podcast with me. Thank you, podlings, wherever you are, for listening to this podcast. Awesome. And we love you. And you're doing such a good job listening to us. If you want to see this podcast, go to the YouTube link and find the Horticult on YouTube, and you can see Jason Berto in all of his glory. Releaf Utah has an Instagram. It's on the links. Link our Instagram, Facebook, whatever. Just come find us, social media us, and you can find out how to even support Releaf Utah as a nonprofit organization. If you're interested in helping plant trees, learning how to do it, cutting edge stuff, the biochar, the gravel pit nursery, contact Jason and he will fill your mind full of awesomeness. Thank you to Jason once more. You guys are awesome. Remember to plant on, Babylon. See ya. Oh, no.